Hello, welcome to another virtual program with Maine Historical Society. I'm Kathleen Newman. It is May 9th, 2025, and this is Restoring Maine's Heritage Narrow Gauge Railroads. Our talk with David J. Buczkowski. And this is part of our partnership with the statewide Festival of Train Movies and Events. It's taking place in the spring of 2025. Now, before we get into our content, we'll just take a moment to remember that where we're here in Maine, we're on Wabanaki homelands, and MHS recognizes the inherent sovereignty of the Abenaki, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot nations within these lands and waters. Understanding Wabanaki history is vital to understanding Maine, and we affirm our commitment to partnering with Wabanaki people to share and contextualize this history with our educational program offerings, just similar to the one we're offering today. You can learn more by visiting our website, mainehistory.org. Joining us today is David Buczkowski. Am I pronouncing that correctly, David?
Buczkowski is fine, or as the late
Buczkowski.
sister Angela used to say, Mr. Buczkowski, but Buczkowski is
Very
fine.
nice. So he's joining us today. He is the president of the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington Railway Museum. And so this talk we're gonna take a look at pre-1933 history of that railway, and then also the post-war rehabilitation and some recent achievements, and current and future projects, including constructing a replica of the 1900 locomotive number 7. And he'll also take a look at some preservation efforts of narrow gauge railroads elsewhere in Maine. So, David, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. And on behalf of our entire organization, I'd like to thank the Maine Historical Society for allowing me to be present today.
Our pleasure.
While you mentioned that it's May 9th, 2025, up and down, we act like it's 1910. So um, we try to keep things as they were back when, only making contingencies for safety and practicality. So we're going to start with a brief look at the history of the museum and of two-foot narrow gauge railroads in Maine. Then move on to some projects we're currently engaged in, and then talk a little bit about the history of the museum. We consider ourselves to be a continuation of the original railroad. Um, that may be a little fiction, but that's how we are. So anyways, let's move on. Where we came from, brief history, telling you about the narrow gauge. Narrow gauge was very specific to Maine. There were 5 original narrow gauge railroads. The original two-foot concept came to Massachusetts, um, in Bedford, Massachusetts, where the Billerica and Bedford Railroad ran for about 9 months from Billerica to Bedford. Um, a gentleman by the name of George Mansfield, if I remember his name correctly, um, viewed the concept in Wales, where the Festiniog Railroad, which also still exists today, um, and then he sold when the Billerica and Bedford gave it up because while it was very popular, it didn't make a lot of money. And then, like now, money is the important thing. He sold to people of Franklin County on the concept, and thus was born the Sandy River Railroad, ultimately becoming the Sandy River and Ranger Lakes Railroad. The narrow gauge in Sheepscot Valley began as the Wiscasset in Quebec. The idea was to run a railroad from the ice-free harbor of Wiscasset all the way to Quebec. Um, Unfortunately, it never quite made it that far. It made it just beyond Albion, where it ran into the Maine Central Railroad. The idea here was for commerce, as it was for most railroads. And the idea of the two-foot gauge railroad was kind of came as a concept because no standard gauge railroad was willing to come in and um, build a railroad from Wiscasset to Quebec. Um, Narrow gauge railroad is cheaper to build and uses less land and is actually much more friendly to the geography. As I said, it only made it a few miles beyond. Oh, I went a little too far. I'm sorry. Speaking of the cost of it, the average cost of building a narrow gauge railroad is approximately a fifth of the cost of a standard gauge railroad. That means less land, less ballast, less lighter rail. Your equipment is smaller. All those things go to into making it a lot cheaper. So when the railroad began, it became the fifth and final narrow gauge railroad. The other railroads being the Bridgeton Saco River, the aforementioned Sandy River Rangeley Lakes, the Monson Railroad, and the Kennebec Central. The railroad at its greatest length ran about 40 to 45 miles, depending on how you measure sidings and the like, running from the port of Wiscasset to Albion, and also at Weeks Mills it branched off to Winslow. The intent was to hook up with the Sandy River Railroad. So when the railroad was actually physically constructed as far as Burnham Junction, Maine, um, which is about 5 miles from the ultimate ending of the railroad at Albion, which is south of Burnham Junction. When it came up to the Maine Central Railroad, it had to cross it, and the railroad wouldn't allow it to, the Maine Central wouldn't allow it to cross at grade, and it had to cross on a bridge or some sort of over the tracks there. Unfortunately, the railroad didn't have enough money to do that because many of its the shareholders never ponied up their money for their stock. So the railroad spent many years in financial distress, only making a profit for approximately 2 years. So once the railroad had to cut back and found that its shareholders weren't, or potential shareholders weren't ponying up for their stock, the railroad was forced to reorganize the receivership, and it became the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington Railroad, with a new goal to connect in Farmington with the Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes Railroad. At the time, the Maine Central was a major shareholder of the Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes, and it viewed the WW&F as competition, so it did not allow it to connect up. As always, money drove things. The railroad was built from Weeks Mills to Winslow and actually served some businesses along the line, especially in Vassalboro. There was a mill there. I think it was South Vassalboro. The railroad was unable to financially build a bridge across the Kennebec River, although it did start construction, and you can still see many of the abutments and the right-of-way running from the other side of the river right into Farmington, if you know where to look. What you see here is locomotive number 4, which was purchased for use on the branch from Weeks Mills to Winslow for building it. The Franklin Construction Company was a wholly owned subsidiary of the WW&F, and it was organized to construct the railroad. A separate railroad, the Franklin, Somerset, and Kennebec Railroad, constructed the line from the Kennebec River into Farmington. Again, that was a wholly owned subsidiary or corporately related to the WW&F. Here's a copy of one of the bridges that was completed on the way to Farmington. Getting stuck here. In 1933, as you can see, there was a wreck here along the river in the Sheepscot Valley, and the railroad had just kind of given up the ghost at that point. It was down to minimal employees, an engineer, conductor, and a brakeman to perform the maintenance on the railroad. So Frank Winter, its final owner, just decided to throw in the towel and just say, that's it. The automobile head was providing all sorts, and trucks were providing all sorts of competition, as well as a trolley in Augusta that was some competition. So all the ideas that Frank Winter had, including the purchase of the uh, Luther Little and Hesper, which were the ships that were you may have seen on Route 1 in Wiscasset, to carry lumber from his forests along the railroad. That didn't pan out either. So, so after 1933, the railroad closed and much of the line was scrapped. Um, it's said that the rail was torn up by the Sherman-Williams Paint Company for money that was owed to it. Um, the railroad's yards in Wiscasset gradually deteriorated, and it's said that for Fourth of July celebration in the 50s, much of the remaining buildings and equipment was burned in a giant bonfire. Few buildings were saved, and the ships were just grounded in Wiscasset and left there. And there was a rail fan by the name of Frank Ramsdell and William Moneypenny who bought some of the equipment. They had hoped to open an amusement park in West Thompson, Connecticut, which is in the eastern part of the state, just below Worcester, Massachusetts. So number 9 was repatriated to West Thompson, along with boxcar 309 and flat car 118, excuse me, along with some rail, where it sat for many years. Frank had a partner, William Moneypenny. Ultimately, Mr. Moneypenny decided that this was not a worthwhile project for him. So funding for the railroad, for the the amusement park, dried up, and the locomotive sat in a barn there until Frank's death, at which time his daughter inherited the equipment and became very protective of it. There's a whole story about number 9 and how she protected it. And her name was Alice Ramsdell, became very famous. The story involves Alice with a shotgun and some of the Army Corps of Engineers, which was trying to take her land to build a floodplain project on I think it was the Thames River. Anyways, through the efforts of our early volunteers, one Harry Percival, he visited Alice and helped maintain the locomotive. And ultimately, when Alice died, her nephew was kind enough to lease number 9 to us back in the early 2000s. And Dale King is his name. And the locomotive was brought up to Peepscott, up to Alna, along with the boxcar and the flat car, which had seriously deteriorated. And over a 15-year effort, we brought number 9 back to life. And in 2015, number 9 steamed for the first time in 80 years on its home rails. Number 9 actually ran on a number of other 2-foot gauge railroads, starting with the Sandy River, and ran it on the Bridgeton-Saco River, which I believe at the time was the Bridgeton and Harrison. Harry is our founder. He was one of those people, excuse me, with a fire in his belly to revive the WW&F. As a child, he used to play on the original right-of-way, and he, in fact, took some of his father's lumber and started to rebuild the tracks on his property, which was part of the original right-of-way in Head Tide Village. Harry worked for the Central Maine Power Company and found that the Central Maine Power owned much of the right-of-way through a series of transactions over the years. And Harry was able to come to a financial agreement with them and bought about half of the remaining right-of-way, not all contiguous, but much of it is in Alna. He then found out that the W&Q still existed as a corporate entity, and he called a meeting of the shareholders and revived the W&Q, which still exists today as a viable, as a for-profit corporation. They own much of the right-of-way, which the WW&F leases from them for the cost of the taxes. Harry always believed that um, any revival of the railroad should be a good citizen and pay its taxes. And he began a series of talks to various historical societies and anybody that really that would have him. He went and talked about it, the fire in his belly burning very brightly. And if you, there were, because of the unique nature of the 2-foot gauge, it had many fans around the country, and they would make a pilgrimage to Maine, specifically the WW&F, to look at the original right-of-way. And if they happened to be near Harry's yard, he had bought a house in Alna, right adjacent to the right-of-way. He would come out, he would chat them up and get them to volunteer and stick a shovel in their hand and get them working. And through those very beginnings, the WWF was created as a 501c3 corporation and has now has over 1,300 members from around the world, including one very rabid member in France. Harry's initial goal was to, as the Sheepscot Valley Railroaders, which is the group was called in the beginning, was to run from Wiscasset all the way up to Albion. And the goal was to do that by 1990, somewhere along that, 1990, 92. Well, he didn't quite make that, but we do have roughly 3.5 miles of track, all laid by volunteers at the present time. And we have some expansion goals in mind that one of the key pieces of land we just closed on yesterday for our journey south. So we'll talk a little bit about the rebirth of the railroad once Harry got involved. Unfortunately, Harry passed away in the early 2000s, and I believe 2001 or 2002. Harry was able to get a very dedicated group of volunteers that number from any Saturday from about 25 people to our work weekends, which are the last weekend of April, and Indigenous People weekend in October. We have upwards of 100 people that come from around the country to help us rebuild the railroad. These are just a few of our projects here that I'll go into detail on some of them as we move on. As I said, we now have roughly 3 miles of track laid on the original right-of-way. Our original station is at Sheepscot, which was a flag stop on the original railroad. Elma Center had a flag stop. We've built a station there, a flag stop station, on the original plot where we found evidence of the station. We also have 2 further stations that were not original to the railroad, what we call Top of the Mountain and Trout Brook Preserve. Top of the Mountain is right before the steepest grade on the railroad, which is 4%. And we have right now we just have a runaround there. We will build a station there for our collaboration with Sea Lion Farms, that we run trains to the farm, and the Lions pick up our passengers with either or horse pulled or tractor pulled wagons to their farm. Trout Brook Preserve is right at 218, where we would have to cross a road. We own or control the right-of-way right into head tide, where we have a physical limitation at the present time. The mountain extension, typically our extensions would progress in anywhere from 750 feet to 1,250 feet at a time, where we'd clear the right-of-way in the winter of 60 years of growth of trees. Then we would prepare the right-of-way, grading, laying gravel and the like. And on our work weekends, we would lay track for it. And like I say, our greatest track laying weekend was approximately 1,250 feet. And then we would open that section shortly thereafter once it had all been ballasted. But for the mountain extension, because it was on a grade, we decided that we would do that all in one fell swoop and not open it to the public until it was completed. And that was approximately 3/4 of a mile. It was made all the more difficult by the fact that there had been some washouts over the years due to the water and trees falling and carrying the embankment down with them, washed out culverts, and missing bridge over Trout Brook. So we started preparing that, um, but we had about a 5-year plan for doing that. And here's a picture of a group of our track crew laying track. We do it the traditional way, by hand, a little bit at a time. Ties are carried by hand, rail is carried by hand. And I'll proceed with the mountain extension shortly. Here's a short video. Let me see if I can play it here. Oh, it's not going to play for me. I apologize. Um, so this shows the approximately 3/4 of a mile of our mountain extension. It was done in sections mainly because there was permitting involved, with shoreline zoning, Maine DEP, and the Army Corps of Engineers, which we handled in-house. We found that hiring consultants was just too pricey for us. You know, we pay as we go. We don't get any government money, federal, state, or otherwise. We rely on grants, our passengers, and donations from our members. So with much planning, we commenced building the mountain extension. So we had three major things we had to deal with. One was finding a bridge, building a bridge, financing it, building the track itself. The top photo here, I don't know if my cursor comes over this, but this was built with two things in mind. One was built to handle ties and track going down the mountain. Because there were some steep drop-offs, we were very concerned about the safety of our volunteers. So our traditional methods of hand laying the track and carrying it when we felt it was just not safe enough. So we came up with this idea, this crane that would handle bundles of ties and rail, would bring it out and lower it down. But the second part of this crane was to use the uppermost portion as a temporary bridge over the Trout Brook. And here we have some filling and excavating for new culverts. So one of our members, who is a bridge inspector, came upon a group in New Hampshire that was trying to rebuild a bridge, what's called a Howe Pony Truss Bridge. A Howe Pony Truss Bridge is a covered bridge, but it just covers the trusses on the bridge. While there was none of these bridges on the original railroad, there was in Head Tide Village over the Sheepscot River there. So the photo on your left is how the Trout Brook looked 1 year before what you see on the right there. There was a group in New Hampshire called the National Society for the Preservation of Covered Bridges that was involved in preserving this bridge. The bridge had been vandalized and was replaced in what became a bike trail over a Boston and Maine branch up there. So this bridge was offered under an RFP to anyone who could use it. We were one of two groups that applied for it because we planned to use it on original railroad right away and on steam over it. We were successful in our RFP. It also came with a grant from the National Park Service that financed the delivery and some additional timber that we needed. The bridge was actually constructed in the parking lot at Sheepscot, about 5 miles from this site here, 5 road miles from this site here. And it was constructed there while work on the mountain extension progressed. It was then hitched to a military 5-ton tractor with a set of wheels under it. So it was essentially a trailer. It was trailered up Route 218 to about 1,000 feet at the end of the right-of-way from the brook. It was then backed up and then over the temporary bridge and set in place. I had the distinct honor of standing in the brook while the bridge was backed into place to make sure that nothing settled and nothing went wrong. Apparently, as president, I was the one that was most subject to being sacrificed in case the bridge fell. Um, so it was, we had contractors that helped us do some of the heavy excavating. We had a marine contractor who was a member who drove the piles for us. But our volunteers worked with the contractors, sometimes upwards of 5 days a week. So once we reached Trout Brook, we constructed a siding, built a station there, which is a typical of historic WW&F flag stop, and put in a turntable so we could turn the locomotive. So the locomotive always ran at the front of the train. That turntable has been graciously lent to us by the Maine Narrow Gauge um, railroad company and museum. We also restore historic cars. Car 56 was donated to us by Maine Narrow Gauge and was completely rebuilt by one of our master carpenters, Marcel Levesque, who saved every possible piece of wood that he could. This was the only cattle car, if you were, or livestock car on any of the Maine narrow gauge railroads. So we felt it important to restore it to its original way it was. As you can see, what made it a livestock car was the doors or the windows in the side for horses, cattle, and whatnot that Marcel is peeking out of. Our original power was locomotive number 51, which ran on a marine railway in Wellfleet, Massachusetts, and was donated by one of our members about 30 years ago or so. One of our volunteers, Jay Barta, restored it. It was used to construct our railroad, as was Flat Car 118, which is original to the railroad and was, oddly enough, used to rip up the rail when Sherwin-Williams took the rail back to security. I took the security back for for money owed to it, and we used it and have been using it to rebuild the railroad. One of the things we do as a museum is to archive original documents, photographs, and the like from the railroad. And as we've gone through the years, many people have donated material that was they had collected, and we found we need archival space for it. So, as a temporary solution to our expanding collection, we built a small room that is climate controlled and moisture controlled. So our goal is to have a separate building for archives eventually, but we're currently talking about fundraising for it. We'll need at least $5 million to do that. When we rebuild our cars or build new cars, which we have done, we typically continue the numbering system from the original railroad. However, we were asked to display a car on the waterfront in Wiscasset by the Wiscasset Town Fathers. And we decided to build a replica of car number 65, which was the Turner Center dairy car, which would have been on the waterfront where the Turner Center dairy was. Turner Center dairy ultimately became Hood, and so it is now on display there. And we have a display that changes every couple of years. In here is a replica of either the Luther Little or the Hesper. I'm not sure which one. We found that we needed storage space. The Maine winter, as you know, is brutal, and it was tough on our equipment. So we've built an engine house, which is a very close replica of the one that was in Wiscasset. It is about 95% complete and should be ready for final dedication later this year. Here's a picture of the inside as it looks. We've got a service pit in it as well, which allows us to service our steam locomotives. It also has smoke jacks, so we can steam up the locomotives indoors during the winter when the weather is a little too cold. we found our electrical needs have grown because you put up a building, you want to have electricity and lighting in it. So we've built this to so we have one point for electricity to come into the campus, and then it's distributed underground from there. Our friends at the Maine Maritime Academy or Maine Maritime Museum used this pavilion to rebuild the Mary E. Right on the waterfront, but because of shoreline zoning, they were not allowed to keep the building and had to tear it down. So one of our late members was a member of both organizations and was able to arrange for the donation and purchase, which he funded the money of this. So our crews dismantled this down in Bath, and we transported it up to Allen Center, where we then rebuilt it. This allows us to hold our events out of the weather a bit rather than renting tents. And tomorrow we'll have our Mother's Day tea there, which is we collaborate with Back Bay Bistro. We strive for historical accuracy, and currently all our cars are hand braked, literally with a brake wheel and wooden brakes against the steel wheels. We have plans to cross Road, and once we cross the road, we have to come under the auspices of the Federal Railroad Administration. As such, we need to have a little bit more sophisticated braking system that brakes the entire train at from one contact point. Rather than using the standard Westinghouse system, we decided that we would revive the Eames automatic vacuum brakes. So it operates rather than pressurized, it operates under a vacuum. Eames never became really popular. It was used in Europe for a bit, but when Fred Eames died under very mysterious circumstances, for all intents and purposes, the technology disappeared. We are reviving it and have spent a number of years and untold hours in recreating the brake system, and it is now installed on a number of our cars and will be undergoing testing, serious testing in the very near future. We've already tested it, and it works fine. It's really wonderful. The reason it was never adopted for major standard gauge railroads is the vacuum system really only works well on short trains of under 10 cars. And of course, today's trains are hundreds of cars long. We, on our equipment, our engine number 10 originally operated on a sugar plantation in Louisiana and was purchased by Edaville Railroad back in the 60s or 70s and regauged from 30 inches to 24 inches. If any of you remember Pleasure Island in Wakefield, Massachusetts, it ran there for about 10 years as number 5. We were able to purchase it through a generous donation from a member and restored it. It ran until 2015 when we decided it was time to check out to see how things were underneath the boiler and in the boiler. And we realized that the boiler had to be rebuilt and retubed. And it is currently undergoing reconstruction in our shops. Locomotive number 7 was the largest locomotive ever used on the WW&F back in its original days. We decided that number 10 was not powerful enough to pull trains up the mountain due to the grade. So we are now currently building locomotive number 11, which will be a replica, a very close replica of number 7, but for safety issues modern safety issues and technology that we're incorporating into it. There aren't too many steam locomotives being built today, but if you come visit us in Elna, you can see a new steam locomotive being constructed. We anticipate that it will be under steam within 3 to 3.5 years. We are also, because we don't have much enclosed passenger capacity. We only have two coaches right now that we can completely enclose, and we borrow one, so we have three. So we are building a coach from scratch, the original way that it was built by the Jackson Sharp shops in Maryland, Baltimore, I believe. Mhm. It is a replica of our current coach number three, which was somewhat selectively deconstructed to find its original construction. We're building it to what we call Smithsonian standards, including gold leaf. Um, the castings for the seat took 11 patterns to do, 11 separate castings to do. And once this coach is built, we will then take our coach number three out of service and refurbish it. It's been being used for over 100 years. Ran on the original railroad, then ran at Edaville for many, many years. And it's time for its reconstruction. So when number three is restored and refurbished, we will have an original three coach, or what will look like an original three coach that the original railroad had. Three coach consist, excuse me. We also have a need for diesel power for when we can't or don't want to run steam. So we're trying something a little different. We searched the world for an appropriate 2-foot gauge diesel, but the cost or appropriateness was not sufficient for us. So we hit upon the idea of buying a standard gauge 45-ton locomotive, which we are going to downsize and regauge to 2-foot gauge. We have a one member, Peter Moxley, who's local, who has taken this under his wings. It actually runs, and we've got it on track at the railroad, but it's an interesting concept. As the railroad has gotten longer and our members have gotten older, though we're attracting younger members, taking care of our right-of-way has become somewhat more difficult, especially replacing ties. We should be replacing 300 ties a year, and we are nowhere near close to that. So through the generous donation of the Candelaria Foundation, we were able to purchase a brand new Kubota excavator, which will be mounted on what we call our X cart, which is this cart you see in front of you here, which is custom built by our shops with outriggers and hydraulic propulsion. So we will be able to do ditching along our line, mowing, and other sorts of maintenance. It's going to be a game changer for us. We are planning for expansion. And in order for that expansion, we need a way to spread ballast. Currently, we spread ballast by literally shoveling it off flat cars. While it's quaint and our members enjoy it, it's not really efficient or quick. So we, after trying to obtain some hopper cars from the East Broad Top, which is a 3-foot gauge, which would have required a lot of work, we discovered that sandstone estates in South Africa had some, as they call, redundant hopper cars. So that was one of my jobs, was to arrange for the purchase and shipping of these 2 hopper cars you see here from South Africa. They require a little work, but that was a lot of fun, making new friends at the Sandstone by way of the Ballot Lake Railroad in Wales, and finding a trucker in the outback of South Africa to ship these to the port, and from the port to get them into New York, and from New York up to Alma. Very fun project. And on the other side of the world, in Australia, we found a 2-foot gauge tamper. You can see me testing it out here when it first arrived. One of our late members, Wayne Lepele, had a contact at a sugar cane plantation in the outback of Australia. And this was also redundant and was donated to us. We just had to pay to get it to Alma, which we did a few years ago. And it is currently being used. It needs a complete refurbishment, but we do use it. People come and visit us and say, "Where's the museum?" Well, the museum is the entire railroad. And so we have found that we didn't have display space. So we built this car barn for storage of much of our stock. And that little bump out you see will become, hopefully this year, when the displays are completed, we'll have a display on the theory of narrow gauge, its history, engineering, and application. Um, we work on our schedule to run trains. We run trains, just like a real railroad. We use hand signals. We schedule them. We have a timetable that we use and that we stick to. So when you come, you ride a train. It's just like riding a train would have been 100 years ago. Due to our location, which is not really convenient to much of the tourists, we found that we need to work on our brand identity and marketing and the like. And we've been working on that and fine tuning it. We also partner with Sea Lion Farm, as I mentioned before, to do agritourism. Midcoast Conservancy owns some land on both sides of our right-of-way at Trout Brook, and we've partnered with them to run trails, ride the rails, to hike the trails. That's worked out really well. We have an arrangement with Wiscasset Chamber of Commerce to display our dairy car on the waterfront in Wiscasset. We found we like to spend our money locally and to partner, and we don't just run trains. We want to run trains for a purpose, and the purpose is to, well, hike the trails, go and see what farming is like and the like, because we consider ourselves more than just a tourist railway. We are a heritage railway, and we want to show what the history of the Sheepscot Valley was back in the day. One of the things we depend on, in fact, mainly depend on, is volunteers. We do not have any paid employees. Everything we do is all volunteer. We do have a contractor who we pay, who is on site many days, but he works and helps to supervise our volunteers. Virtually every building you see on site and much of the equipment has been built or has been restored or is maintained by volunteers. Where are we headed? The future of narrow gauge in Sheepscot Valley, we think, is bright. As I said, we are a nonprofit organization established pursuant to IRC, Internal Revenue Code 501c3, and a nonprofit. So we're headed, as I said, once Coach 9 is built, we will restore Coach 3, which is an original coach to the Wiscasset and Quebec Railroad. We hope to build an archives building, which would also serve as our guests and visitor center. We have plans for moving that south on an expansion. Our South Alna extension, we hope to run to approximately 3 miles to the south to the Alna Wiscasset town line. We are able to use much of the right-of-way, and we have acquired, where we don't own the right-of-way, we have acquired land outside the right-of-way, which will enable us to do an actually fairly scenic ride, extending that ride around a pond. We only have 1 or 2 pieces left to acquire, and we hope to do that by easement as opposed to by purchase or trading land for it. This will enable us to build a visitor center and perhaps our archives closer to civilization, as you were, closer to Route 1, which was where the traffic comes through, and to keep much of the traffic off Alna roads, and we would have a parking lot there that would be able to take care of many more cars than we can right now at Sheepscot. Excuse me. Also, looking northward to head tide, this is a picture of the original head tide station. We have, as I said earlier, we have about half to 3/4 of a mile through a cut along the Sheepscot River, which is very, very beautiful. That would bring us into the historic village of Head Tide, We are a historic store, was just deeded to the or left to the town by its former inhabitant. So head tide at some point, we hope will become a destination. Also on infrastructure at top of the mountain, we have in storage a sawmill and a shingle mill. So we would like to build a structure at top of the mountain so that while people are waiting for the wagons to go to the farm, on certain days we would operate a sawmill to cut some of the lumber that from our own property that we would then use. We have some volunteers and other people who aren't necessarily railroad type people, um, who have approached us about building this and running this. So we're excited about that. So imagine it, if you will, that the date is June 11th, 2033. The southbound train has just cleared the mountain and is headed southward to Alma Center. 100 years ago, an accident occurred that would have sealed the railroad's fate in all reasonable circumstances. Yet, through the passion and vision of many dedicated to a common goal, the railway of big dreams and little wheels has come out against all the odds. Will this train complete the trip that was cut short 100 years earlier? After pulling it to Sheepscot Station, will the conductors call boom out, next stop Wiscasset? We hope so. If you'd like to learn more about the railroad, um, this is probably the best book for it, on sale at our bookstore or online, 2 Feet to Tidewater. It is the quintessential book about the railroad. Our website is www.fry.org. We have a discussion forum where you can pretty much literally learn what's going on at the railroad every day. Someone posts. We have a Facebook page. And in addition to 2 Feet to Tidewater, is Big Dreams and Little Wheels by Crosby Wiggins, The Maine Two-Footers, which is a book about all the Maine Two-Footers, which was written by Mr. Moody, Linwood Moody, back, I think, in the 30s or 40s. It is the Bible on 2 foot gauge. And then there is I think it's a 7-book series, Narrow Gauge in the Sheepscot Valley, which goes into excruciating detail about the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington Railway. And lastly, please become a member. It's $35 a year, or you can buy a lifetime membership for $350. You get a bi-monthly newsletter, discounted train fares, and access to the members-only portion of the forum where you learn the real nitty-gritty. We run on our volunteers, and if you have any talents whatsoever, we'll find a way to use and abuse them. And come and volunteer. These are a couple of our younger members, Dan Malkowski and Bryce Weeks, who have been with us since they were probably 12 years old with their parents or grandparents, and have become vital members of the railroad. In fact, Bryce is now a conductor on the Downeaster, so which if you've taken to Boston, he may have been your conductor. Our physical address is 97 Cross Road in Maine. This is our mailing address. And this is currently a volunteer. He's the son of our marketing director, Steve Pribowski, who actually moved to Alma from Vermont and lives right along the railroad. So Johnny has grown up on the railroad. Here's a few shots of, is this 2025 or is this 1910? How about this? Some of our younger volunteers here who've qualified to run steam. How many of your friends can run a steam locomotive? Another scene that looks like it could be from earlier in the 20th century. And this shot was taken when we needed to relay rail along a very early portion of the railroad that wasn't constructed to our current standards. And we used this as an opportunity for a photography event. We hired a team of horses to pull flat car 118, which is how the original railroad was ripped up, using flat car 118. In a couple weekends, we'll have our World War I reenactment. And if you come on certain days, you're able to ride our rail car. The Model T rail car was used This was built by a member to replicate one that was originally used on the railroad after steam shut down. The railroad ran its last couple of years on a U.S. Postal Service mail contract, and so a Model T was converted to a track car. I'll take any questions now if there are any.
Thank you so much, David. Someone is asking, you talked about the railroad crossing the road. What do you have
Mhm.
to do that, and how far across do you intend to bring the line?
Okay, our first step is to go about third of a mile, maybe about, I don't know, 1,300 feet from Sheepscut Station over Cross Road. What that involves is permitting mainly because across the street is a fire pond and a wet area. So we have to deal with the the Alna Shoreline zoning, the Maine DEP, I believe the Army Corps of Engineers, and in crossing the road, we have to deal with the Maine DOT. So what that involves is we file for crossing the road. It then involves a public hearing, which will be held in conjunction with the town of Elna, where the public is allowed to come and comment on it. I, when we, I guess, got a little, not a little ahead of ourselves. We were a little optimistic about 5 or 6 years ago. I contacted person at after some effort finding who did it because no one builds crossings anymore. You know, the railroads haven't expanded much. And I found the one person that I was told was in charge of this. He was a little surprised, but then he said, "Yeah, yes, I'll be the person." But we had a very nice chat, and we discussed how it would be done, and he was very helpful to us. So we found with permitting going down the mountain that it's not a real scary thing. It's just when you open up with them and you tell them what you want to do, and you ask their assistance. Like we found the people in Maine, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the town of Alna, have been very supportive and very helpful. So, they have requests, and we know we're going to have some and sort of have anticipated them in crossing near the water. So it's directly adjacent to the original right of way. So, there are some technical things there that we are very, very prepared to do and cooperate with.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We're coming up on the end of our time, but thank you so much for being here and for sharing this with us. You guys really have do some amazing work and have some amazing programming coming up. So the Railway Museum, the website, folks, is wwfry.org. And then if you're interested in more information on the statewide Festival of Trains and Movies, that's maintrainfest.com. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you again, David, for sharing this with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry if I bored you a little bit too big getting down in the weeds, but
Not at
hopefully
all.
my enthusiasm comes through. Um,
Very much, very
I could
much.
we could not do this with our volunteers. And the one thing is nobody takes credit for anything, so we take credit as an organization. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you
please
again.
come visit us.
We will. We will for sure. Thanks, everybody.